Perfect. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan McManus. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Farm to Institution Fellow with MSU Center for Regional Food Systems. And I'll be your host for today's very short webinar. You're joining us today for the second webinar of our series about the 2020 to 21 10 cents evaluation report. In this series, we'll be covering key findings of the evaluation, including all of the interesting and big takeaways from this important year. Quick housekeeping note, this is a short webinar, max 30 minutes, so we'll be taking any questions at the very end, but feel free to type them in the chat box as we go. All right, on the menu today, we'll be providing a quick introduction to how the 10 cents program works in case you aren't familiar with it. Then I'll share some key findings on who was engaged in the program. But before I run through everything, we'll pause in the middle to hear from Melanie Wong. She's the Farm to ECE specialist at Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities, and she'll talk more about early care and education sites and how important they are in this program. So this program is formally known as 10 cents a meal for Michigan's kids and farms. I'll just be referencing this as 10 cents for the series. And it is a competitive state-funded grant. So it's actually written into Michigan's legislature. And it provides schools, early care and education sites, and other organizations participating in any USDA child nutrition program with match funding up to 10 cents per meal to purchase and serve Michigan-grown fruits, vegetables, and dried beans. And the program is implemented by the Michigan Department of Education. They run all of the fun administrative aspects of the program, like accepting grantees, distributing funds, and managing paperwork. There are 3 other partners that help with different program areas. And in short, Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities is the outreach and communications partner. They also help with advocacy and legislation. Then there's us with the Center for Regional Food Systems. We are the evaluation partner. We make this report every year. And then we also help with local food sourcing assistance among farms, food suppliers, and grantees. And then lastly, there is the Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development. And they are the key partner for agriculture. They can help producers get connected to the resources they need to sell to grantees. This program is a matching grant, so it helps to double the investment in Michigan grown produce and beans. So for example, if a grantee is awarded a $5,000 grant, they have to commit to spending at least $10,000 towards local food purchases. I'm going to really quickly run through some of the key findings from this 2020 to 21 school year. And I talked about this briefly in our last webinar, but I can't emphasize enough how this was one of the biggest years in the program for a couple of reasons. First, it was the program's first school year since the start of the pandemic in March 2020. So as you can imagine, the program changed greatly from when it was just a pilot before the pandemic to 2020, when food service settings and food service operations changed completely, and we saw big impacts to the supply chain. Second, early care and education sites were eligible to participate for the first time ever. This is a completely different kind of grantee than what we had before. And Melanie's going to talk more about this shortly. And then lastly, this was the first year that the program went statewide. The pilot program originally started in one small specific region and then slowly grew from there. The last pilot year before this, there was only 57 grantees in 27 counties. And this year, the program grew to 143 grantees across the state. We saw $1.4 million in grants awarded to these grantees that were spread out in 48 different counties. We estimated nearly 450,000 Michigan children were reached through the program, and that's 3 times more children reached than the previous full program year in 2018. And when we looked at K through 12 schools, there were almost 438,000 school children reached, which was almost a third of all K through 12 school children in Michigan that school year. And again, we had ECEs for the first time. We had 14 this year, and we could estimate that over 11,000 children could have been reached through that. So for this webinar, we're going to hone into 3 categories of the key players in the program. First, we have the grantees and the food program managers of those grantees. They could be from public schools, non-public schools, early care and education sites, and other childcare sponsors. Second, we had farms and food businesses that took part in this program by growing and selling their products. And then third, Of course, there were children that were served the locally grown foods. This included young children in those ECE settings, all the way up to K through 12 children served through the schools. You just heard me talk broadly about grantees. I'll talk a little bit more about them later today. In the next slide, I'll quickly talk about farms and food businesses before going into the impact on children. In another webinar, I'll dive much deeper into the farms and food businesses that were part of the 10 cent supply chain. But real quickly, we saw 100 different farms from over 30 counties as the farm of origin. So that means grantees could source the farm that grew their purchased fruits, vegetables, or dry beans to 100 different farms across the state. The most common way that farmers sold their Michigan grown products were actually through intermediaries like a food hub or retailer, but we also saw sales through broadline and specialty distributors, and there were farms that sold direct to grantees. On average, a grantee could trace their local food purchases to an average of 5 farms throughout the year. Again, we'll talk more about this in another webinar. So by using enrollment and demographic information collected and shared by the Michigan Department of Education, we could get a better look at 10 cents grantees and the children being served in their food programs. On this slide, you can see our findings on K through 12 grantees. We saw that the percentage of school children that were eligible for free and reduced price meals in 10 cent schools were more than 2 percentage points higher than school children across the state overall. We also saw that from MDE's demographic information that they collect, 10 cents grantees served a higher percentage of African American, Asian American, and Hispanic school children than that of the state overall. Now, what all this can tell us is that, yes, the population of children served by the program has increased significantly from prior years because of statewide expansion, and not to mention the inclusion of ECEs, which Melanie will talk about in just a minute. But as we look into the future, expanding program eligibility allows many more grantees across Michigan to participate, and that can set the stage for more children to benefit from 10 cents. So I'm going to pause here and turn it over to Melanie. She's going to talk more about ECEs.
Thanks, Megan. Everybody just give me 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Alrighty, so everybody should now be able to see a note page. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about early care and education sites because like Megan is saying, they're very different from the school population that 10 cents a meal started with. So just to start off, what is early care and education? So when we're saying early care and education, we're primarily talking about that 0 to 5 population where children learn and are cared for. So this could be a preschool childcare site, such as a childcare center, or a program like Head Start or Great Start to Readiness. So when 10 cents a meal expanded to include early care and education, we really were able to now offer our youngest children this opportunity to access Michigan grown fruits and vegetables and have more opportunities for food and nutrition education by having those food program managers be able to participate in a program like 10 cents a meal. So while there are some similarities between farm to early care and education, and farm to school, there are some differences as well. First, they promote similar values that connect children to food, agriculture, and nutrition. That would be that overarching similarity between the two. However, the characteristics that make farm to early care and education sites unique also matter because it will impact the way that the program rolls out and the ability for food program managers to fully take advantage of the program and integrate it into their sites. So one big difference is that school programs typically are utilizing the National School Breakfast and National School Lunch programs. Well, for early care and education sites that qualify for 10 cents a meal, the primary USDA child nutrition program that they are utilizing is called the Child and Adult Care Food Program, and it provides reimbursements for snacks and meals. The programs are similar, but they have their own nutrition requirements and some differences in the way that things are measured and what is required for the health of the younger children versus children who are a little bit older. And while schools are primarily working with distributors to source food, early care and education programs are typically smaller. And so they're purchasing food on a much smaller scale, with many center operators often shopping even at grocery stores or farmers markets. And I wanted to mention, because of the smaller scale of these sites, it makes them a really great fit to work with smaller scale farmers. So there's some work that's being explored and done with smaller farmers who do community supported agriculture. So those are like fruits and vegetable boxes. And so because and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but because these centers are typically smaller, also their staff is smaller. So the idea of getting a box of fruits and vegetables either delivered to them or that they can pick up and incorporate into what they're serving is a really, really great idea. And so similarly, with food preparation, schools may have dedicated food service staff who are running their food programs. And this always isn't the case with early care and education sites, especially the smaller ones, where the staff may be grocery shopping, they may be caring for the children, doing the food preparation, doing the lessons, and serving all of the meals. So that's another thing to take into consideration, as well as the serving style. I know Head Start programs specifically have family style serving, so that offers the opportunity to incorporate other things like food and nutrition education while actually eating, as well as healthy modeling, because often these teachers are sitting around the table and assisting the children with getting their food, as well as even eating with them. And talking about food and education activities, this may look different. So, in schools, there may be structured lessons that are incorporated. In an early care and education site, it might be something more simple, like story time, right? We're dealing with children that have a different set of developmental abilities because of their age. And so the kinds of educational activities can also look different. They need to look different. And I just want to mention that so far, the main farm to early care and education programs that have participated in 10 cents a meal are center-based programs. But as 10 cents a meal expands, we're really hoping to see more participation with other kinds of early care and education sites, such as childcare homes. And so that's kind of the work that we're getting into as the program grows, of trying to get all of those people connected and all of the players who are in that early care and education world to help push 10 cents a meal forward as it expands. So just to wrap up, talking about the opportunities, this is another similarity to, of course, working with the schools, is that 10 cents a meal offers the opportunity for food program managers at early care and education sites to really help support healthy meals and snacks that they're already serving through the Child and Adult Care Food Program for our early care and education sites, and then for schools through all of the other National School Lunch, National School Breakfast programs. The overarching goal is that we can continue to support Michigan's children in having healthy Michigan-grown foods, as well as supporting our local farmers and our farming economy here in Michigan. So that financial incentive really does help. And then also, by participating in 10 cents a meal, ECE providers are engaging in those farm to early care and education practices, like sourcing and serving the local food, and also being encouraged to do those food and nutrition education activities that all help to expose these really young children to opportunities to learn and explore food before they even get to the school age. And so as the program grows, you can see how if a child is able to access benefits from 10 cents a meal as a very young child in early care and education setting, and then transition to a school where they're also participating in 10 cents a meal, that can expand their opportunities and their exposures to healthy foods and that kind of food and nutrition education. So that's what I have to share with you all today about early care and education sites. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share about that, Megan, and I'm going to turn it back to you to finish up the webinar. And stop my share. Hold on. There we go.
Perfect. Thank you, Melanie. Great. So to end the day, I'm going to run through some findings around food program managers. One thing that we ask in the first survey of every year that a participating food program manager takes is, how many years of experience do you have with purchasing local foods for food service programs? What we found that was interesting for this year was that the majority of grantees reported 6 years or more of experience purchasing local foods. It's quite a bit of experience. And yet nearly a fifth indicated they were new to purchasing local foods with no previous experience. So this presented a really interesting context for the program administration to be aware of these different experience levels and to provide the right training and resources for both. Also, in the first survey, we asked food program managers about their motivations, barriers, and challenges to purchasing and serving local foods. We found the top 3 reported motivators were support for Michigan farms and food businesses, higher quality of food, and access to fresher food. Fresh was a really specific aspect of food that was mentioned quite a bit. This is pretty similar to top motivators in previous years. You can see here below some quotes from grantees that encompass these themes. The first says, we have a lot of farmers in our school community, so I'd like to support our families. I also think that finding local produce gives us a fresher product for our students. And then another grantee stated this as their motivations: support local farm and industry, better perception of food service program, better food. For barriers to purchasing and serving local foods, the top reported was limited availability. And this pertained to the seasonal availability of local foods during the winter and off season, as well as a limited volume of local foods for grantees to purchase from. This was reported twice as frequently as any other barrier. And then the second most common barrier was supplier logistics. And I'll actually go into that in the next slide. And then that was followed by budget constraints. And here at the bottom, you can see the first quote from a grantee that says, aggregation is the largest barrier. It is difficult purchasing locally grown fresh produce and the volume needed for a large school district. And then another grantee below that stated, cost, seasonality, and foods from far away are much cheaper. Now for logistical challenges, the top reported challenge was distribution methods. And this was related to delivery. So delivery methods, some grantees stated there were limitations around a minimum dollar amount for a vendor to deliver to their school or site. There was also talk about limitations mentioned around the lack of delivery options throughout the week. Some grantees needed it more frequently, while others needed it just once a week on a particular day. This challenge was followed by the lack of available local foods. I talked about that in the last slide. And then that was followed by the lack of staff labor to prepare local foods. And we heard from a lot of grantees about restrictions with staff capacity in their food service operations. And this impacted their ability to prepare and serve fresh foods. You can see in this quote below, a grantee talks about this and they say, processing is a challenge. Locally grown fresh produce can be purchased, but it needs to be processed. And then another grantee talks about a different challenge. They said, not sure if we'll be able to find enough farmers to produce amounts of produce locally that will go through. So our evaluation shed some light on the different challenges and barriers that grantees faced during this pandemic setting in 2020 to 21. Now for the last slide, I'm going to really quickly talk about the activities that were conducted by grantees to support the 10 cents program. In every survey of the year, we asked food program managers what types of activities they conducted. The most common activity was promotional posters, and then that was followed by social media, and then that was followed by taste testing. And this was very different than previous years where in-person activities like taste testing were the most common. On the right, you can see the top educational activities for nutritional education in the classroom and cafeteria. And on average, grantees reported conducting 7 types of activities throughout the year. When we asked them what were the most successful activities, we found that social media was the most successful, and then that was followed by taste testing. Again, this was very different from previous years when in-person activities like taste testing were usually number 1. So all this information was really interesting to see how grantees interacted with children in their farm to school programs during the pandemic setting. So that's a wrap for today. Next week, we're going to dive into what foods were served through 10 cents. So we'll feature findings about what foods were purchased, tried, what grantees wanted to try. We'll feature Colleen Matz. She's the Farm Institution Director here at the center. And then we won't have a webinar on the 22nd, but we'll pick back up on the 1st with how foods move through the supply chain, 10 cent supply chain. And that's when we'll dive really deep into the farm and food business impact of the program. That's going to feature Lori Yelton from the Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development, and she's going to talk for a few minutes about resources for producers. Then we'll end the series on March 8th with the big picture. We'll look at how 10 cents was reaching towards its goals, and that's going to feature Wendy Crowley from the Michigan Department of Education. She runs the 10 cents program. So this is our contact information. If you have any questions about the evaluation, or local food sourcing, feel free to reach out to myself or Colleen Matz. And then if you have any other inquiries about 10 cents or ECEs, feel free to reach out to Wendy or Melanie. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions, comments, feedback. All right, I see a question from Maddie. Feel free to take yourself off mute or I can read it for you.
Yeah, so I was just wondering for the taste testing activity, what does that look like?
Yeah, I can add what I read from the evaluation and then Melanie, you can chime in. So what we saw through evaluation was that food program managers would get this local food and then they would share it with the teachers. And so this would happen in a classroom setting most often, but it could also happen in their cafeteria as we have a cool picture, I wish I could share it, of like a little line where they could have a little table and share out little cups of produce for different students or children to try in. And then we've also had farmers come in and talk to the classroom and bring in some of their products. So there's a lot of different ways they could do taste testing. In the report, we list some of the most popular foods, but it is a very popular activity. And it definitely was before the pandemic. Melanie, do you have anything to add about ECEs?
Yeah, I just want to share that often grantees can partner with different community organizations, and sometimes it's even those community organizations helping to run taste testing, such as doing like a smoothie taste test with thumbs up, thumbs down with the whole entire cafeteria. Or it may look like one of the kitchen staff taking the product that they're going to be serving at lunch that day or for snack into the classroom, showing the children the product and maybe having them taste the raw version of it, and then they see it again in their lunch or snack later. So there's lots of different ways that taste testing can happen, but it's primarily directed for the children. That doesn't mean that the parents or community members can't be a part of that too, but that's probably a different kind of event with a taste test.
Yeah, that reminds me, I saw in the pandemic, we had schools that kind of adapted their food service operations. So they would do take-home boxes. So they put the produce in the boxes for children to bring through their to their families. So I guess that could be a way where families have the opportunity to try the foods. Great question, Maddie. Anyone else have any other questions before we end the day? All right, well, if you think of any, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Melanie. Thank you guys so much for attending today. We really appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you next week if you're able, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Melanie.
Thank you.